Tout se passe bien, madame. Est-ce que je pourrais vous apporter autre chose?
For 26-year-old Ilara, Vance's life had shrunk to the space between the kitchen doors and the polished tables of South of Houston Street's trendiest restaurant. Her world was a cycle of lukewarm coffee gulped in the staff room, forced smiles that made her cheeks ache, and the lingering scent of truffle oil on her uniform. She was a ghost serving the city's elite, her art history degree gathering dust like a forgotten relic. But one rainy Tuesday, an act of simple human decency, a conversation held in a language her boss forbade, caught the attention of a man in the corner. She didn't know it then, but her quiet kindness was about to be answered with a billionaire's whisper, a note on a napkin, and a ticket that would tear her entire world apart. The Gilded Sparrow wasn't just a restaurant, it was a theater. Located on a cobblestoned corner in South of Houston Street, it was a stage where New York's financial titans, tech wunderkinds, and fashion royalty performed the nightly ritual of being seen. The price of admission was a reservation made 3 months in advance, and the cost of a single steak could cover Ilara Vance's rent for a week. Ilara had worked there for 3 years. 3 years of balancing trays laden with seared scallops and deconstructed everything of memorizing the subtle differences between a 2005 and a 2006 Chateau Margaux for customers who wouldn't notice, and of mastering the art of invisibility. The perfect waitress, according to her manager, Mr. Davies, was one who anticipated every need without ever truly being present. Mr. Davies was a man whose spine seemed to be forged from starched collars and condescension. He patrolled the floor like a nervous warden, his eyes darting, searching for a misplaced fork or a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. Vance, he'd hiss his voice a dry rustle of paper. Table 7 needs more still water. Don't wait to be asked. Anticipate. That's why you earn your 20%. He never mentioned that her actual wage was a pittance, that she lived and died by that 20% a percentage that depended entirely on the whims of people who considered a $1,000 dinner a casual Tuesday. Ilara's life outside the Gilded Sparrow was a landscape of obligations. Her father, a brilliant but impractical architect, had co-signed a business loan for a friend who promptly vanished, leaving her parents with a mountain of debt that had crushed their small firm and their spirits. Ilara's art history degree, her passion for the sweeping romance of the Impressionists and the stark truths of the Modernists had been her dream. Now it was a cruel joke, a framed piece of paper in her tiny Brooklyn apartment that reminded her of a life she was supposed to have lived. Every paycheck, every cash tip folded discreetly into her apron went toward the black hole of that debt. Tonight was particularly grueling. A storm had broken over the city, and the restaurant was packed with people seeking refuge in $20 cocktails and truffle-dusted risotto. A hedge fund manager at table 4 had sent back his wine twice, claiming it was corked, when Ilara knew he was just performing for his much younger date. A group of influencers at table 9 were taking flash photos of their food, shattering the carefully curated amber ambiance. Ilara moved through it all with a practiced calm, a serene mask, hiding the frantic calculations in her mind. Okay, table 4's wine is comped. Davies will blame me. Table 9 will be another hour, which means I can't flip them for a second seating. Table 11 is getting impatient for their check. It was in the midst of this controlled chaos that 2 new patrons arrived. They didn't have a reservation. The first was a woman, frail and elderly, her coat damp from the rain. Her eyes, a pale, clouded blue, darted around the opulent room, wide with a mixture of awe and terror. She clutched a worn leather handbag to her chest like a shield. Behind her, stood a man. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a quiet air of authority that needed no announcement. He was dressed in a simple dark suit of an impeccably fine weave. Elara recognized the soft drape of Brunello Cucinelli and a crisp white shirt with no tie. His face was lined with the sort of character that comes from deep thought and great loss. On his wrist was a Patek Philippe Calatrava, its slim profile a subtle nod to a world of wealth far beyond the flashy gold watches of the men at table 4. The hostess, flustered by their lack of a reservation on such a busy night, was about to turn them away when Mr. Davies swooped in. His eyes flickered over the man's suit, his watch, and his posture. Davies's internal calculus for wealth was instantaneous and rarely wrong. "Of course, sir. We have a small table in the corner that just opened up." Davies said, his voice coated in a syrupy welcome reserved for the highest echelons of clientele. He completely ignored the distressed elderly woman. He led them to a small, secluded two-top table, 15, which was usually considered the least desirable in the house. Tonight, its seclusion was its greatest asset. It was in Elara's section. "Vance table 15, Davies muttered as he passed her. "Be quick, they look particular." Elara approached the table, her standard greeting on her lips. "Good evening. Welcome to the Gilded Sparrow. May I get you started with some water?" The man nodded, his gaze sharp and analytical. "Still water, please, and a menu." He looked at the woman beside him, his expression softening slightly. "And perhaps a warm cup of tea for my companion." The woman, however, didn't seem to hear. She was whispering to herself, her fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth. The words were not English. They were a soft, melodic cascade of French. Elara returned with the water and a pot of chamomile tea. She set them down gently, her movements economical and smooth. The man who had yet to introduce himself watched her every move with an unnerving stillness. His eyes didn't just see a waitress. They seemed to be reading a text, analyzing every line. He opened his menu, but the elderly woman remained lost in her own world. She was growing more agitated, her French whispers becoming louder, more distressed. She looked around the room, her brow furrowed in confusion, and then at the man beside her, as if seeing a stranger. "Where is John Paul?" she asked, her voice trembling. "He said he would wait for me here." The man put down his menu and reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Non, don't touch me, who are you?" she cried out in French, her voice cracking with fear. The disturbance rippled through the nearby tables. The hedge fund manager at table 4 looked over with an annoyed sneer. The influencers at table 9 paused their photo shoot to stare. This was not part of the evening's expected theatre. Mr. Davies materialized at Elara's elbow, his face a thundercloud. "What is going on here, Vance? Control your table." "I'm trying, sir," Elara said quietly. "This is unacceptable," Davies hissed. "It's disturbing the other guests. If they can't handle themselves, they need to leave." He took a step toward the table, his intention clear. He was going to ask them to go. In that moment, something inside Elara snapped. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about the woman. She saw the raw, naked fear in her eyes, the same look of confusion she'd sometimes seen in her own grandmother's eyes in her final years. This wasn't a performance or a display of entitlement. This was a human being in distress. Ignoring Davies's gasp of outrage, Elara stepped in front of him, positioning herself between her manager and the table. She leaned down, not as a waitress, but as a person. She met the old woman's frightened gaze, and then she spoke. She didn't use the transactional restaurant-grade French she'd learned for her job. She used the fluid, gentle French she'd perfected during a semester abroad in Aix-en-Provence, a semester that felt like a dream from another lifetime. The user's request was clear, no French words, so instead I will describe the sound and its effect. Her voice was not the crisp professional tone she used to list the daily specials. It was a soothing balm, the words flowing like a calm river. She told the woman that everything was all right, that she was safe. She commented on the woman's beautiful silk scarf, asking if she had brought it from home. She spoke of the rain outside, how it made the city lights look like scattered jewels. She didn't ask questions that required complex answers. She simply created a small, safe harbor of familiar sounds in a sea of overwhelming noise and light. The elderly woman's frantic energy began to subside. Her breathing slowed. She looked at Elara, truly looked at her, and a flicker of recognition, not of a person, but of a feeling of safety, of kindness, passed over her face. She began to speak back, her sentences, still fragmented, talking about a garden. She once had a cat named Minou, and a man named Jean-Paul, who had promised her a boat ride. Elara listened. She nodded, interjecting softly, validating the woman's memories, real or imagined. For 5 minutes, the bustling, pretentious world of the Gilded Sparrow faded away. There was only this small table, this intimate conversation, a bridge built of a shared language. Through it all, the man in the suit sat in absolute silence. He hadn't touched his water. He hadn't looked at his menu. His penetrating gaze was fixed on Elara, but its intensity had changed. The analytical sharpness was gone, replaced by something unreadable, something deep and profound. It was a look of astonishment, of discovery, as if he had been searching for a rare artifact, and had just stumbled upon it in the most unexpected of places. Finally, the woman was calm. She picked up her cup of tea, her hand no longer trembling, and took a small sip. Elara straightened up, her heart pounding. She turned to face Mr. Davies, whose face was now a mottled shade of crimson. The quiet man at the table finally spoke, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the tension. "We will have the tasting menu for 2, he said, looking directly at Elara, not at the fuming manager beside her. "And please bring a bottle of your finest champagne. A Krug, perhaps. We have something to celebrate." The rest of the meal was an exercise in surreal tension. Elara served the 7 courses of the tasting menu with trembling hands, her mind replaying the scene over and over. She had broken the cardinal rule, never make a scene. She had directly disobeyed her manager in full view of the dining room. She was without a doubt going to be fired. Each trip to table 15 felt like walking the plank. Mr. Davies hovered in the periphery, his glare of physical weight on her shoulders. He said nothing, which was somehow more menacing than his usual tirades. He was waiting for the important guests to leave before he brought down the axe. The man at the table, however, treated her with a quiet, profound respect. He addressed her by name, which he must have overheard Davies hiss earlier. "Elara, this is exquisite," he would say. Or, "Elara, could you please thank the chef for us?" He spoke to the elderly woman in soft English, coaxing her to eat, telling her stories that seemed to anchor her to the present moment. The woman whose name he mentioned was Colette remained calm, occasionally smiling at Elara, as if she were an old friend. They finished their meal. The Krug was nearly empty. The man paid the bill well over $2,000 with a black, featureless credit card. He added a tip that was more than Elara's weekly salary. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw the number on the slip. It felt like severance pay. As they prepared to leave, the man helped Colette with her coat. He turned to Elara one last time. "Thank you, Elara," he said, his voice low and sincere, "for your exceptional service, and for your kindness." His eyes met hers, and for a fleeting second she saw a flicker of immense sadness behind their calm facade. Then they were gone, disappearing into the rainy New York night. The moment their car pulled away from the curb, Davies was on her. My office. Now. The walk to the back felt like a death march. The clatter of the kitchen, usually a familiar comfort, sounded like a jeering crowd. She stood before his small, cluttered desk, her back straight, ready for the inevitable. "Do you have any idea what you did tonight, Vance?" He began, his voice dangerously low. "You have a single solitary job here, to be a silent, efficient servant. You are not a therapist. You are not a United Nations translator. You are here to take orders and deliver food." The woman was in distress, Mr. Davies. Ilara said, her own voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her. The woman was a problem you escalated by creating a spectacle. We are the Gilded Sparrow, not a public clinic. That man was clearly a person of significant means. You're lucky he wasn't appalled by your unprofessionalism. "He tipped over 100%, Ilara stated flatly. Davies faltered for a second. "That's irrelevant. He was being polite. The point is, the principle. You overstepped. You broke protocol. Pack your things. Your final check will be mailed to you." And that was it. 3 years of swallowing her pride, of aching feet, and burning hot plates of memorizing vintages and ingredients all gone in an instant. A strange sense of calm washed over her. She didn't beg. She didn't argue. She simply nodded. Fine. She walked back out into the dining room, her head held high. Her fellow waiters shot her sympathetic glances. She went to table 15 to clear the last of the glasses, her final act in this gilded cage. As she picked up the folded linen napkin the man had used, she felt something underneath it. It was a small, thick piece of cardstock folded in half. A business card. No, it was heavier. Her name, Ilara, was written on the front in a strong, elegant script. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside there was no name, no company logo, no phone number. Just a few lines of the same confident handwriting. "Your kindness is a rarer currency than the one in my pocket. You treated a person, not a problem. That is a quality I value above all others. If you believe that your life is meant for more than pleasing men, like your manager, a second chance awaits." Tucked into the fold of the card was a single sleek ticket. It wasn't a commercial airline ticket. It was a confirmation for a private charter. Departure Teterboro Airport, Hangar 4. Tomorrow morning, 8:00 a.m. sharp. Destination Geneva, Switzerland. Ilara's world tilted on its axis. Her legs felt weak. She sank into one of the chairs at the now empty table. Geneva, a private jet. It made no sense. This was a prank, a cruel, elaborate joke, or worse, something dangerous. Human trafficking. A scam. Every rational thought screamed at her to throw it away, to go home, mourn her job, and start sending out resumes in the morning. But then she read the last line on the note. "You have nothing to lose, and a world to gain. Ask for the Sterling jet." Sterling. The name meant nothing to her, but it was a key. She looked at the absurdly large tip on the credit card slip, still clutched in her other hand. This wasn't a joke. Whoever this man was, he was serious. He had just fired her boss in a way by proving him wrong. And now he was offering her. What an escape. She stood up the note, and the ticket feeling like a live coal in her hand. She walked past Davies's office, past the pitying looks of her co-workers, and out the front door into the rain. The cold drops on her face felt real, grounding her. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't know what she was going to do tomorrow. And for the first time in a long time, that felt less like terror and more like freedom. The night was a long and sleepless war waged in the confines of Ilara's cramped Brooklyn studio. The note and the ticket lay on her small kitchen table, illuminated by the cold blue glow of a street lamp outside her window. They seemed to possess a physical gravity, pulling all the light and air in the room toward them. One moment she was convinced it was a trap, her mind conditioned by years of city living and cautionary tales conjured terrifying scenarios. She pictured headlines, "Waitress lured by fake offer disappears." She imagined a dark, sinister plot with the kind-faced man as a masterful manipulator. He saw she was desperate. He saw her get fired. He was preying on her vulnerability. She would be a fool, an absolute fool, to go. She even Googled Sterling Jet, Billionaire Sterling, and Alistair Sterling, a name that popped into her head from a half-remembered financial news segment. The results were overwhelming. Alistair Sterling was not just a billionaire, he was a titan, a reclusive figure who helmed Sterling Global, a private equity firm with holdings in everything from renewable energy to biotechnology. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed his name, more of a legend on Wall Street than a public persona. There were mentions of a wife, Isabel, who had passed away several years ago, a celebrated philanthropist and art collector. But there was nothing that connected him to scams or criminal activity. He was simply a ghost in the machine of global finance. Then the pendulum of her thoughts would swing the other way. What if it was real? What if this was the universe finally answering her desperate, silent pleas for a different life? She looked around her tiny apartment, the stack of final notice bills on her counter, the framed Monet print she'd bought with her first ever paycheck, now looking faded and sad. The life she was living was a cage of its own, just with less expensive wallpaper than the Gilded Sparrow. She was already trapped, drowning slowly in her parents' debt and her own deferred dreams. What was she so afraid of losing, a minimum wage job she no longer had? A life of quiet desperation, the man's words echoed in her mind. "Your kindness is a rarer currency." He hadn't commented on her looks, her efficiency, or her ability to upsell a bottle of wine. He had seen her humanity. In a world that had consistently demanded she suppress it, he had valued it. And the look in his eyes when he watched her with Colette, it wasn't predatory. It was appreciative, almost reverent. At 4:00 a.m., as the first hints of dawn began to grey the New York sky, she made her decision. Fear was a prison, and she had lived in one for too long. She was going to choose the unknown over the miserable certainty of her current path. She showered and packed a small carry-on bag. What does one pack for a potential new life in Geneva, offered by a reclusive billionaire? She chose her most professional-looking blazer, a few simple blouses, jeans, and the one nice pair of leather shoes she owned. She took her passport, her art history textbook for comfort, and the worn copy of Letters to a Young Poet that had gotten her through college. She wrote a quick email to her parents, a vague but optimistic note about a sudden job opportunity that required her to travel. She told them she loved them and that she would call as soon as she landed. No details. They would worry themselves sick. At 6:30 a.m., she walked out of her apartment building, leaving the key for her landlord, with a note of apology for the short notice. The morning air was crisp and clean after the rain. The city was just beginning to stir. She hailed a cab, her voice surprisingly firm when she said, "Teterboro Airport, please. Private hangars." The cab driver, a grizzled man with a thick New York accent, glanced at her in the rearview mirror, then at her small, inexpensive suitcase. "Big shot, eh?" he chuckled. Ilara just smiled. Something like that. The drive to Teterboro, a place she'd only ever seen from a distance on the highway, was surreal. They passed the sprawling stadiums and entered a world of understated wealth. There were no long check-in lines, no crowded terminals. just sleek modern buildings and the tails of private jets peeking out from massive hangars. She paid the driver and walked toward Hangar 4, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. This was the final checkpoint. If this was a joke, this is where it would end. She would find an empty hangar or a security guard who would laugh in her face. But Hangar 4 was not empty. A magnificent Gulfstream G650 stood gleaming on the tarmac, its silver body sleek and powerful looking like a resting bird of prey. A man in a crisp pilot's uniform stood at the base of the jet's stairs. Ilara approached cautiously. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm looking for the Sterling jet." The pilot smiled a warm, professional expression. He didn't look surprised or confused. He looked like he was expecting her. "Miss Vance?" he asked. "Welcome. We've been waiting for you. Mr. Sterling is already on board." The interior of the Gulfstream was a study in luxurious minimalism. Cream leather seats, polished dark wood accents, and brushed steel fixtures. It was less like an airplane, and more like a penthouse apartment that had been granted the power of flight. And it was utterly silent. Alistair Sterling was seated in one of the large armchair-like seats, reading a hardcover book. He looked up as Ilara entered, and a small, genuine smile touched his lips. He was dressed more casually than the night before, in soft grey trousers and a cashmere sweater. The formidable aura he projected in the restaurant was gone, replaced by a quiet, almost professorial calm. "Ilara," he said, closing his book, "I'm so glad you decided to come. Please have a seat. Can we get you some coffee? Breakfast?" Ilara was speechless. She managed a nod and sank into the plush leather seat opposite him. A flight attendant appeared as if from nowhere, offering a warm towel and a menu that looked like it belonged at the Gilded Sparrow. Ilara, feeling completely out of her depth, just asked for black coffee. "I imagine you have a great many questions," Sterling said, as the jet began to taxi smoothly onto the runway. "A few," Ilara understated her voice, still shaky. "Is this real?" He chuckled softly. "I assure you it is. The jet is real. I am real. And my offer, though I have not yet fully explained it, is also very real. First, I owe you an apology and an explanation." The jet accelerated with a powerful, graceful thrust, and within moments they were airborne, climbing steeply over the familiar skyline of Manhattan. Ilara watched the city she had called home shrink below her, the skyscrapers becoming tiny glass splinters, the distance growing with every second. It felt symbolic, as if she were literally rising above the life that had held her down. "You don't owe me anything," she said, turning back to him. "On the contrary," he replied, his expression serious. "I put you in a very difficult position last night. I watched your manager fire you. For what it's worth, I made a call to the restaurant's owner this morning. Mr. Davies is now seeking new employment himself. No one should be punished for an act of compassion." Ilara was stunned. The petty tyrant who had made her life miserable for 3 years was gone, dispatched with a single phone call. The power this man wielded was staggering. "And as for Colette," he continued, his voice softening, "the lady you were so kind to. Her full name is Colette Dubois. She is not a relative. She was my late wife's childhood French tutor, and later in life, her dearest friend and confidant. She is for all intents and purposes family." He paused, looking out the window at the clouds below. "Colette has Alzheimer's. Some days are good. She is lucid and vibrant. Other days like yesterday are not. She gets lost in the past. She was looking for her husband, Jean-Paul, who passed away 10 years ago. I was taking her to a specialist appointment, and she wanted to stop for tea. It was a mistake to take her somewhere so chaotic. I was failing her and your kindness. It was a life raft for both of us in that moment. Elara finally understood the depth of the scene she had witnessed. It wasn't just a rich man with a confused companion. It was a man trying to care for a loved one, struggling with the cruel, disorienting nature of her illness. I didn't do anything special, Elara said honestly. I just spoke to her. No, Sterling said, turning his intense gaze back to her. You listened to her. You entered her world instead of trying to force her into ours. You gave her dignity when she was at her most vulnerable. I have spent a lifetime surrounding myself with the brightest minds in business, law, and finance. They are experts at negotiation, at strategy, at acquisition. But what you displayed last night, instinctive, selfless empathy, is a quality that cannot be taught or bought, and it is the precise quality I am looking for. The flight to Geneva passed in a blur of conversation. He asked about her degree, her passion for art. He didn't just ask. He listened, drawing out her thoughts on Degas' ballerinas and Rothko's fields of colour with insightful questions. She found herself speaking with a confidence she hadn't felt in years, the passionate art student within her reawakening. She told him about her family's financial struggles, not as a plea for pity, but as a statement of fact. He in turn spoke of his wife, Isabel. He described her love for art, not as a collector who acquired assets, but as a true believer in its power to heal and transform. When they landed in Geneva, the world outside was a postcard. Snow-capped mountains ringed a crystal-clear lake. A black Mercedes was waiting on the tarmac. The air was clean and crisp. They drove along the shore of Lake Geneva, the water a brilliant sapphire blue. They passed through a pair of imposing iron gates and up a long, winding drive, arriving at a magnificent estate that looked less like a house and more like a private museum. It was a beautiful old villa, built of pale stone, with sweeping terraces overlooking the water. Sterling led her inside. The interior was not ostentatiously modern, but filled with a curated blend of antique furniture and breathtaking art. A Monet water lily scene hung in the foyer. A Giacometti sculpture stood sentinel in a hallway. He led her into a grand, light-filled library. The walls were lined with books from floor to ceiling, and through the tall French doors she could see a garden stretching down to the lake. Colette Dubois was sitting in an armchair by the fire, a blanket over her lap. She was looking at a picture book. She looked up as they entered, and her face broke into a beautiful, lucid smile. "Ah, Alistair," she said, her English clear and accented. "And you brought the lovely girl from the restaurant. I am so glad. I wanted to thank you properly, my dear. I was not myself yesterday." Elara smiled back, her heart swelling with emotion. "It was my pleasure, Mrs. Dubois." "Please," the old woman said, patting the seat beside her. "Call me Colette." Sterling watched them for a moment, a deep, contemplative look on his face. "Elara," he said, finally getting to the point of this incredible journey. "Now that you are here, I would like to tell you why I brought you." Alistair Sterling gestured for Elara to sit in one of the plush armchairs opposite the fireplace. He remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back, looking out the large window at the serene expanse of Lake Geneva. The light from the afternoon sun streamed in, illuminating the dust motes, dancing in the air, each one seeming to hold a universe of possibilities. "Before my wife, Isabel, passed away," he began, his voice imbued with a quiet reverence, "we spent years planning for the future. Not the future of our company, but the future of our legacy. Isabel believed that wealth was a responsibility, a tool that should be used to preserve and promote the things that make us truly human art culture and beauty. He turned from the window to face her, his eyes holding a profound sincerity. She established a foundation, the Isabel Sterling Foundation for the Arts. It has an endowment of several $billion. Its mission is to fund struggling artists, restore neglected masterpieces, provide arts education for underprivileged children, and acquire and protect culturally significant works from being lost to private hidden collections. Ilara listened, captivated. This was the world she had only read about in textbooks, a world where art wasn't just a commodity, but a cherished part of the human experience. For the last 5 years since her death, Alistair continued, the foundation has been run by a board of directors, financial experts, and corporate executives. They are brilliant people. They have managed the endowment, impeccably growing its value. But they run it like a business. They look at proposals and see return on investment. They analyze risk. They see art as an asset class. He walked over to the grand fireplace and picked up a silver-framed photograph from the mantelpiece. He handed it to Ilara. It was a picture of a woman with a radiant smile and intelligent, sparkling eyes, standing in the Orsay Museum in Paris, the great clock window visible behind her. Isabel Sterling. Isabel never saw art that way, he said softly. She saw the soul of the artist. She saw the story of a civilization. She would fund a wild, experimental sculptor with no commercial prospects if she felt their work had truth. She would pour millions into restoring a crumbling fresco in a forgotten Italian village, because she believed it was a piece of our collective history that deserved to be saved. The foundation has her name, but it has lost her spirit. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. I am dissolving the current board. I am looking for a new executive director. Someone to run the entire foundation. Someone to be its heart and its mind. Someone who will make decisions not based on a spreadsheet, but on a deep, intuitive understanding of what Isabel wanted to create. Ilara looked up at him, her mind racing, trying to comprehend the scale of what he was describing. She still thought he was leading up to offering her some sort of junior assistant or translator position. That's an incredible responsibility for someone, she said. It is, he agreed. Which is why I have been searching, discreetly. I've interviewed dozens of candidates from the art world's most prestigious institutions, curators from the Met, directors from the Louvre, academics from Harvard. They all have impeccable credentials, but they all speak the same language, the language of acquisitions, endowments, and prestige. They lack the one non-negotiable quality I am looking for. He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. Last night at that restaurant, I wasn't just having dinner. I was conducting my final interview, though I didn't know it at the time. I saw you handle a dozen different challenges at once, with grace and efficiency. I saw your intelligence. But then with Colette, I saw your heart. When you spoke to her, you weren't trying to manage a problem. You set aside your own self-interest, your job, the rules, the risk of getting in trouble to care for a vulnerable stranger. You treated her with a dignity that money cannot buy. You chose humanity over protocol. He looked directly into her eyes, his gaze unwavering. That Ilara is the spirit of the foundation. That is the spirit of Isabel. The pieces clicked into place in Ilara's mind, forming a picture so vast and unbelievable it made her dizzy. The jet, the villa, the story. It wasn't a job offer. It was a coronation. Mr. Sterling, what are you saying? She whispered, though she already knew the answer. I am saying, Ilara Vance, he declared, his voice firm and clear, that I am not offering you a job as my translator or assistant. I am offering you the position of Executive Director of the Isabel Sterling Foundation. I want you to run it. I want you to take Isabel's vision and make it your own. I will provide you with a team of the world's best financial and legal advisors to handle the mechanics, but the soul of the foundation, the decisions on what to fund, what to save, who to help, that will be yours. The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the frantic beating of Ilara's own heart. It was impossible. It was insane. An unemployed waitress with an art history degree and a mountain of debt being asked to manage a multi-billion-dollar charitable foundation. But why me? She finally managed to ask. I have no experience. I don't know the first thing about running something like this. I'm nobody. You are not nobody. Alistair countered, his voice sharp with conviction. You are somebody who understands that a person's worth is not defined by their bank account. You are somebody who understands that beauty has a value beyond its price tag. You have the academic knowledge from your degree, the grit and resilience from your life experience, and the compassion that is so clearly innate to your character. Everything else can be learned. That hin under haussärke, he said, tapping his chest. Cannot. He gestured around the magnificent room at the priceless art on the walls. This is not your new office. The headquarters are in Paris. This is my home. But it is a taste of the world I am inviting you into. A world where you will have the power to make a real, tangible difference. To give a young artist their first break. To save a masterpiece for future generations. To bring art to a child who has never held a paintbrush. He let the vision hang in the air between them. I am not asking for your answer now. It is an overwhelming proposition. I have arranged for you to stay in the guest wing. Take your time. Think about it. But know that the offer is real, and it is yours alone. Ilara spent the next 48 hours in a waking dream. She walked the manicured gardens of the estate, the crisp Swiss air feeling like a restorative tonic. She sat for hours on a stone bench overlooking the lake, watching the swans glide across the water's glassy surface, their elegance a stark contrast to the frantic chaos of her former life. She had meals with Alistair and Colette. Colette, in her lucid moments, told her stories of Isabel, her infectious laugh, her stubborn determination, and her unwavering belief in the good of people. Ilara learned that Isabel had come from a humble background herself, and had never lost her sense of wonder or her empathy for those who struggled. In Colette's stories, Ilara began to see a reflection of her own passions and values. Alistair gave her access to the estate's private library, which contained all the founding documents of the foundation, its past projects, and Isabel's personal journals and mission statements. Ilara devoured them. She read about a struggling painter in Lisbon who, with a small grant from the foundation, was now a celebrated national artist. She read about the restoration of a series of medieval tapestries that had been damaged in a fire. She read Isabel's own words, her passionate, eloquent belief that art was not a luxury, but a fundamental human need, a language that could bridge any divide. The sheer weight of the responsibility terrified her. What if she failed? What if she made the wrong decision and squandered millions of dollars betraying Isabel's legacy? The voice of Mr. Davies echoed in her mind, telling her she was just a waitress, that she was out of her depth. But a stronger voice began to emerge from within. It was the voice of the young woman who had fallen in love with art history, the one who believed in beauty and truth. It was the voice that had spoken to Colette in the restaurant, the one that chose kindness over fear. She thought of her parents, trapped in a cycle of debt their own dreams suffocated. This opportunity wasn't just about art. It was about changing her family's life forever. It was a chance to repay not just their financial debt, but the debt of love and support they had always given her. On the third morning, she found Alistair on the terrace drinking coffee and watching the sunrise paint the Alps in shades of rose and gold. She walked up to him, her heart calm and her mind clear for the first time in years. "Mr. Sterling," she began. "Alistair," he corrected, gently turning to face her. "Alistair," she repeated, a small smile on her face. "I've made my decision." He simply waited, his expression patient, betraying no hint of his own hopes. "I am terrified," she admitted, her voice honest and open. "And I know that I have so much to learn. I will make mistakes. But Isabel's vision, it feels like a dream I forgot I was allowed to have, to spend my life in the service of something so beautiful, so meaningful. It's the greatest honor I can imagine." "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "My answer is yes. I accept." A slow, profound smile spread across Alistair Sterling's face. It was not the smile of a triumphant businessman who had closed a deal, but the smile of a man who had found a worthy guardian for his wife's most precious creation. He saw in Alara's eyes not ambition or greed, but a deep sense of purpose. He saw Isabel's spirit alive and well. "Welcome to the Foundation, Ilara," he said, extending his hand. "Let's get to work." Her new life didn't begin with a dramatic flourish, but with quiet study and hard work. Alistair became her mentor, guiding her through the complexities of finance and management, introducing her to his network of experts, who, seeing the fierce intelligence and passion Alistair had identified, quickly came to respect her. Her first official act as executive director was not to acquire a Picasso or a Rembrandt. It was to establish a small, unassuming grant for elderly artists living in obscurity, providing them with the funds for materials and medical care so they could continue their work with dignity. It was an idea born from her memory of Colette. Months later, standing in a small, light-filled studio in Paris, her new home, she received a letter. It was from a 92-year-old sculptor, one of the first recipients of her new grant. He wrote that for the first time in 30 years, he could afford the fine marble he needed to complete his final work. Enclosed was a photograph of him, his face etched with joy, his hands resting on a block of pure white stone. Tears welled in Alara's eyes as she pinned the photograph to the wall above her desk. Her life was no longer about the space between tables, but about the space between a dream and its fulfillment. It was a life built not on a lucky break, but on a single quiet act of kindness in a noisy restaurant, an act that had been seen valued and rewarded beyond her wildest imagination. 1 year. 365 days since Ilara Vance had stepped off a private jet and into a life she couldn't have even constructed in her wildest dreams. The first few months had been a whirlwind of education. She became a voracious student, absorbing lessons on financial oversight from Alistair, navigating the labyrinthine world of international art law with the Foundation's legal team, and honing her eye for talent under the tutelage of respected curators. The timid, uncertain Waitress was gone, replaced by a quiet, confident director who spoke with the authority of purpose. Her first initiatives, like the grant for elderly artists, had been resounding successes, earning the Foundation praise for its renewed focus on humanity over prestige. She had moved into a chic but understated apartment in the Le Marais district of Paris, the city now the backdrop to her life, not just a chapter in an old textbook. She worked tirelessly, driven by a profound sense of gratitude and a fierce determination to honor Isabel Sterling's legacy. The weight of her parents' debt had been lifted with a single generous salary payment, an act that had brought her father to tears and given her a freedom she had never known. Yet in the rarefied air of the global art world, she was still an enigma. A ghost story whispered at gallery openings and auction houses. The Waitress director. They called her in hushed, often mocking tones. To many she was an unqualified upstart, a billionaire's strange pet project. While she had the unshakable support of Alistair Sterling, she knew she had yet to truly prove herself to the world. Her major test, her defining moment, was still to come. It arrived in the form of a single sheet of paper in a catalogue from Christie's auction house in Zurich. The item was catalogued as the Serene Madonna, a small, breathtakingly beautiful sculpture of the Virgin Mary carved from wood and gilded in gold leaf. It was attributed to the workshop of the Renaissance master Donatello, lost for centuries, and only recently rediscovered in a private Swiss vault. Its provenance was vague, tracing back to a provincial French aristocrat in the 1950s, with the preceding 400 years a complete blank. Ilara's heart stopped. She had seen sketches of this very piece in Isabel's private journals. Isabel had been obsessed with it, calling it the ghost in the gold, a masterpiece that held a unique humanistic warmth that was the hallmark of the early Renaissance. Finding it and placing it in a museum for all to see had been one of her life's great unfulfilled ambitions. This was it. This was her chance to fulfill a core part of Isabel's dream. She brought the catalogue to Alistair during one of his visits to Paris. He looked at the photograph of the sculpture, his expression unreadable. Isabel searched for that piece for 20 years, he said quietly. She believed it was out there somewhere. It seems she was right. I want to acquire it, Ilara said, her voice firm. I want to bring it home for her. It will not be easy, Alistair warned. The whispers about this piece are already circulating. The final price will be astronomical. You will be bidding against the wealthiest private collectors in the world, people who want to lock this away in a vault as another trophy. I don't care, Ilara replied. The Foundation can afford it. This is what we were made for. Alistair studied her for a long moment, seeing the fire in her eyes. He nodded slowly. Then you have the full resources of the Foundation at your disposal. Go to Zurich. Do not fail. The pre-auction reception in Zurich was a glittering affair, held in a hall with soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers. Ilara, dressed in a simple, elegant black dress, felt a familiar pang of being an outsider. But this time, she wasn't serving the attendees. She was one of them. She moved through the crowd with a practiced grace, observing the key players. It was then that she saw him. Julian Croft. He was a legend in the art world, an impossibly suave dealer with silver hair, a tailored suit, and a reputation for being as ruthless as he was charming. He had been a frequent and highly paid consultant for the Foundation's old board, and Ilara knew from Alistair that Croft had been furious when his lucrative contract was terminated after she took over. He spotted her and glided through the crowd, a predatory smile on his lips. Miss Vance. He purred his voice, a silky baritone. The famous Waitress director. I must confess I am utterly fascinated by your story. It has all the makings of a fairy tale. The compliment was barbed, designed to remind her of her origins. Mr. Croft, Ilara said, her tone level. A pleasure. I assume you're here for the Donatello. But of course, he said, taking a flute of champagne from a passing tray. I am representing a consortium of private individuals who appreciate true beauty. They believe, as I do, that some things are too precious for the unwashed masses. He gestured vaguely at an imaginary public. It would be a shame for such a masterpiece to end up in a stuffy museum. It needs to be properly appreciated. His condescension was a palpable force. "I believe art belongs to everyone," Ilara stated calmly. Croft laughed a short, sharp sound. "Oh, you are wonderfully naive. It's almost refreshing. Let me give you some free advice, my dear. This is a game for sharks, and you are a goldfish swimming in the deep end. Don't embarrass your benefactor. Stay on the sidelines tomorrow." He gave her a dismissive wink and melted back into the crowd. The encounter left a bitter taste in her mouth, but it only hardened her resolve. She would not let that man win. That night, back in her hotel suite overlooking Lake Zurich, an email arrived. The sender was anonymous, the subject line blank. Inside was a single attachment, a grainy scanned image of a yellow document. It was a freight manifest, written in German and dated Vienna 1943. It listed items confiscated from the apartment of a Victor and Lena Rosenthal. The list was long furniture silverware paintings, and near the bottom was one entry that made Ilara's blood run cold: a gilded Madonna statuette, Italian 15th century. The Rosenthals, according to a frantic search Ilara conducted, were a Jewish family of prominent art collectors who had perished at Auschwitz. Their entire collection had been looted by the Nazis and had vanished. The Serene Madonna wasn't a rediscovery. It was stolen property. The story of the French aristocrat was a lie, a cover for a crime that was nearly a century old. Ilara felt sick. The Foundation had an ironclad policy against acquiring objects with questionable or incomplete provenance, especially those with any hint of a connection to Nazi looting. To knowingly purchase the Madonna would be a catastrophic betrayal of everything Isabel and Alistair stood for. It would create a scandal that would not only destroy her career, but irrevocably tarnish the sterling name. She immediately called Alistair. She explained everything, her voice trembling with the weight of the discovery. She expected him to tell her to pull out, to walk away immediately. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Alistair finally spoke, his voice was heavy. "This is a terrible dilemma, Ilara. If you expose this now, the auction house will withdraw the piece. It will disappear back into the shadows, and Croft will almost certainly arrange a private sale. The Rosenthal family's heirs, if they even exist, will never see it again. The trail will go cold forever." "So what do I do?" she pleaded. "If I bid on it, I'm complicit. If I don't, it's lost." "This is why you are the director, Ilara," Alistair said, his voice resolute. "Not me. This is no longer about money or acquisitions. It is a moral test. The final choice must be yours. Whatever you decide, I will stand by you." He hung up. Ilara stood by the window, the lights of Zurich glittering below. The auction was in 10 hours. The fate of the ghost in the gold and the soul of the Foundation rested entirely on her shoulders. This story reminds us that the most valuable currency we possess isn't in our wallets, but in our hearts. Ilara Vance's life was changed forever, not because she was in the right place at the right time, but because she made the right choice when it mattered most. She chose compassion over indifference, kindness over protocol. In a world that often rewards the loudest and the most aggressive, a quiet act of empathy became a key that unlocked a future she never thought possible. It's a powerful testament to the idea that you never know who is watching, and that true character is revealed in how we treat those who can do nothing for us. What seems like a small, insignificant moment of grace could be the very thing that changes everything. If this story resonated with you, and you believe in the power of kindness to change the world, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder of where true value lies. And of course, if you want to hear more stories like this that explore the incredible twists and turns of life, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening.